They called it the King Tiger, the last hope of the Third Reich. 69 tons of impenetrable armor and a gun that could shoot over the horizon. But its history holds a strange, obsessive pattern that historians often downplay. This tank almost never charged head-on. It was almost impossible to repair in the field, and its crews almost always abandoned it at the first sign of real danger. Why? What secret did German tankers know that made them ditch the most powerful land weapon of the war? The answer lies in a chain of incredible miscalculations, in a personal friendship that cost lives, in a factory that burned for 7 days, and in armor that shattered like glass. We will follow the entire chain, from Hitler's drawing board to the abandoned machine in a Polish village. You will learn how a single design flaw turned an incoming shell into a kamikaze inside the turret, how a shortage of 3 key metals made the armor deadly for its own crew, and how a tactic was devised that turned this steel king into a helpless target. If you think you know everything about World War II, this story will make you think again. Stay tuned. The silence after battle always holds surprises, but the one that hung over a Polish village in August 1944 was special. Soviet scouts moving cautiously between houses suddenly froze. Right in the middle of the street, its long barrel aimed menacingly into the sky, stood a tank. It looked like no other, massive, with heavy, sloped armor plates, a true steel colossus. The strangest thing was the absolute silence surrounding it. No hum of an engine, no muffled crew voices, no grind of a rotating turret. It seemed the war itself held its breath before this giant. Gathering their courage, the soldiers approached. Its frontal armor, as thick as a man's hand, coldly reflected the sunlight. Step by step, expecting at any moment to hear a hatch open or see a muzzle flash, they reached the hull. Inside reigned the same ringing order and the same frightening emptiness. Full fuel tanks, impeccably stacked rows of shells, clean instrument panels. No signs of panic or a hasty retreat. It was as if the crew of this masterpiece of German engineering had simply vanished into thin air, abandoning what the Wehrmacht command saw as its last trump card, and Hitler his embodied hope for a war-changing miracle. This absurd fact raises a chain of disturbing questions. What made trained tankers abandon their undamaged, fully equipped combat post? Was it a sudden panic attack or a cold calculation based on bitter knowledge? Perhaps behind the menacing appearance and gunpowder lurked a fatal flaw that turned this steel symbol of might into a steel trap for those inside? To solve this strange scene, we need to rewind time and see how the King Tiger itself was born. Its story is one of a failed triumph, where the first and most crucial mistake was made even before the designers drew the first sketch of the hull. Because initially, they weren't designing a tank at all, but merely a mobile platform for one specific, albeit incredibly powerful, gun. This fundamental backwards logic, the gun first, the machine second, became the project's fatal flaw. Usually, designers created a balanced combat platform, carefully matching the armament to its capabilities. Here, they turned everything upside down. In August 1942, while German armies were still pushing towards the Volga and Caucasian oil, the Wehrmacht Armaments Office issued a task: build a carrier for the newest 88mm gun with an unprecedented long barrel.
a weapon capable of destroying any target from ranges where the enemy couldn't even return fire. The tank, in essence, was to be just a mobile carriage for this sniper barrel. Implementing this idea sparked a battle of engineering titans. On one side stood the legendary Dr. Ferdinand Porsche, an automotive genius and Hitler's personal friend. His approach was bold to the point of recklessness, an electromechanical transmission requiring tons of scarce copper, an extremely complex suspension, several engine options. He was creating not just a tank, but an engineering masterpiece, ignoring the costs and production complexity in wartime. He was so confident of victory that even before the Commission's decision, he ordered the production of 50 turrets for his project. Opposing him was the sober pragmatism of the Henschel Company, led by chief designer Erwin Adders, aptly nicknamed the Father of Tigers. His philosophy was the opposite: no revolutions, maximum standardization with the already produced Panther, proven components, a reliable Maybach gasoline engine already in mass production. His interleaved road wheel suspension, a personal brainchild of a high-ranking official from that same armaments office, also gave his project political points. Adders' pragmatism won, but Hitler did not forget his old friend. The Führer personally ordered that the winning Henschel hulls be fitted with those 50 ready-made Porsche turrets. Thus, the first King Tigers became strange hybrids, receiving a foreign head on their own body. And this head hid a lethal flaw. The rounded Porsche turret with powerful frontal armor seemed more reliable at first glance, but in combat it turned out that when a shell hit the lower part of the turret's front, instead of ricocheting away, it would deflect downwards, straight into the relatively thin hull roof. The crew received a fatal blow from the most unexpected place. Additionally, this turret held fewer shells, and its shell ejection port weakened its protection. Despite this design flaw, the German command's plans for the new wonder weapon were truly grandiose. In early 1944, the tank, which the Germans modestly called simply Tiger B, went into series production. Industry was supposed to deliver 120 machines monthly, with plans to build almost 1,500 of these steel giants to form that very armored fist for a crushing counterattack. But these ambitious calculations were destined to collide with the harsh reality of total war, where the enemy also had a strong voice. And that voice would soon sound with the roar of aircraft engines on their bombing runs.
However, these plans drawn on blueprints were not meant to be realized in metal on the intended scale. While staff officers built schedules, Allied strategists prepared their response. Just 3 days after the German command proudly demonstrated the first samples of the new tank, a black cloud rose over the city of Kassel, not of rain, but of 569 Allied heavy bombers. Their deadly cargo fell precisely on the Henschel factories, the only place producing the King Tigers. The fire caused by this raid raged for a week, turning entire districts and factory halls into charred ruins. Thousands died, even more were left homeless. The ambitious program, envisioning a tank rolling off the line every few days, crumbled to dust. German industry had to rebuild production practically from scratch. Instead of an assembly line, the process became painstaking manual work. No more than 10 machines were in the workshop at once, and building one giant now took about 2 weeks. By August 1944, production rates were painstakingly raised a bit, but new air raids halved the output again. Instead of the planned 1,300 tanks, only about 490 were built over the entire production run. In tandem with the catastrophic drop in volume, quality steadily declined.
Germany was losing sources of vital alloying metals, nickel, chromium, molybdenum. Armor steel deprived of these additives became brittle, like cast iron. Now, even an unpenetrated shell hitting the armor caused a terrifying phenomenon from the inside, spalling. Sharp fragments would fly off the interior surface, maiming the crew and disabling mechanisms. The expensive machine, meant to protect, itself became a trap for its own men. Desperation reached such a level that from the last production batches, even the interior paint vanished. There was neither time nor materials. They also stopped applying the special anti-mine paste Zimmerit, officially due to a mythical fire hazard, but in reality because its drying took precious days that became an unaffordable luxury. Building one such behemoth consumed 120 tons of steel, almost twice that of the more balanced Panther. And this expensive, unreliable, raw machine finally began leaving the damaged workshops to the front. Its first proving ground would be the green fields and picturesque villages of Normandy. And the first impression of the new weapon was stunning for both the enemy and the Germans themselves. In the summer of 1944, the first serial King Tigers reached the 503rd Heavy Tank Battalion in France. On July 17th, near the town of Colombelles, these steel fortresses clashed with American Shermans. The result was devastating. The powerful 88mm shells punched through the armor of the American tanks as if it were cardboard. 12 knocked out and burning vehicles on the battlefield clearly proved, in an open duel at medium to long range, the Sherman stood no chance against the new German giant. It seemed the designers had finally created the perfect weapon. But the illusion of omnipotence vanished the very next day. On July 18th, the British Operation Goodwood began, and its main striking force was not armored vehicles. The sky above the positions of the 503rd Battalion blackened with squadrons of bombers. Hundreds of planes dropped tons of high explosive and fragmentation bombs on the area where the German tanks were concentrated. Against this steel downpour, neither armor thickness nor gunpowder helped. The King Tigers burned as fiercely as any other machine. That day forever demonstrated their main vulnerability: absolute defenselessness against enemy air supremacy. Nevertheless, the ground threat remained colossal. Allied command realized that in a head-on tank clash, countering the new Tiger was nearly impossible. Its 150mm frontal armor was impervious to standard Allied tank guns. A desperate tactic was born. Upon encountering such a giant, everything that could fire would immediately engage: tanks, anti-tank guns, field artillery. A literal hail of shells would fall on a single target, hoping to at least damage the tracks, optics, or demoralize the crew. It was not a method of combat, but an act of desperation. The situation began to change only in September 1944, when the American M36 Jackson tank destroyer, armed with a powerful 90mm gun, appeared on the Western Front. Finally, the Allies had a weapon capable of penetrating the King Tiger's armor at realistic combat ranges and fighting it on equal terms. But if in the West the enemy sought a technical answer, on the other end of Europe they approached the problem differently. On the Eastern Front, where the Red Army fought, the German giants awaited not just a new machine, they awaited a new, merciless tactic that would turn the vaunted technical superiority into a death trap. And it was the Soviet tankers who first found the key to defeating the seemingly invincible foe. This key lay not in creating a more powerful gun, but in a cold analysis of the enemy's fundamental shortcomings. And the main one was its monstrous weight of 69 tons. To move this mountain of steel, they used a 700-horsepower Maybach engine inherited from the significantly lighter Panther. Its power was catastrophically insufficient. On a highway, the tank barely accelerated to 38 kilometers per hour, and on rough terrain, its speed dropped to 15 kilometers per hour. On an incline, the machine literally crawled, and its transmission and engine, operating at their limit, constantly overheated and broke down. The crew faced a grim choice: either baby the mechanics, sacrificing maneuverability, or try to act actively and guarantee stalling mid-battle. The running gear, meant to distribute the giant weight, became a source of problems. The wide tracks quickly wore down the teeth of the drive sprockets, which needed replacement after just 250–300 kilometers. But the real logistical nightmare was transportation. For rail transport, they had to swap the combat tracks for narrow transport tracks, a laborious operation wasting precious hours. Most European bridges simply couldn't handle a 70-ton load, making many waterways impassable. During retreats, the Germans often had to abandon perfectly serviceable tanks on riverbanks, unable to cross them. Recovering a knocked-out giant required several special recovery vehicles and Herculean effort. Thus, Soviet command drew an obvious tactical conclusion. The King Tiger was not a maneuverable combat unit, but a heavyweight, sluggish toy soldier. Its strength lay solely in defense from a pre-selected position where it could use its powerful gun. To deprive it of this advantage, to force it to move, to impose close-quarters combat where its thick frontal armor lost its significance, that was the entire formula for victory. And a brilliant practical demonstration of this formula was carried out by the Red Army in that very August of 1944. The August sun beat down on the Polish soil when the 501st Heavy Tank Battalion of the Wehrmacht, reinforced with the newest King Tigers, received orders to eliminate the Soviet bridgehead on the western bank of the Vistula. German command was throwing its most powerful trump card into battle, confident of success. The crews also believed in their superiority. Their machines carried seemingly impenetrable armor and guns capable of hitting any target from 2 kilometers away. On the morning of August 13th, a column of heavy tanks moved into the attack, expecting to meet head-on resistance. But Soviet commanders had prepared a cruel surprise for them. Instead of exposing themselves to crushing long-range fire, they organized a series of carefully planned ambushes. T-34-85 tanks and heavy IS-2s were hidden in the folds of the terrain, behind houses and barns in the villages along the German advance route. When the cumbersome column of King Tigers became ensnared on narrow streets and fields with no room to maneuver, its flanks suddenly came alive. Shots thundered from all sides. The combat distance shrank to few hundred, even tens of meters. Here, the advantage of German optics and ballistics no longer mattered. The 85mm shells of the T-34-85 proved capable of piercing the side armor of the Tigers, and the powerful 122mm guns of the IS-2s shattered even their frontal projection. For the German tankers, the battle turned into a nightmare. Their sluggish machines couldn't turn their turrets fast enough onto suddenly appearing targets. Engines overheated when trying to change position. Tracks bogged down in soft ground. One by one, the steel giants burst into flames from accurate hits. By the end of the day, the battlefield was littered with the remains of 24 German tanks. Among them were 3 King Tigers, which in initial reports weren't even identified, mistaken for Panthers. Inspecting the trophies brought another shock. One of the tanks, with side number 502, was found in a village yard in perfect condition. Full fuel tanks, all ammunition in place, mechanisms intact. Its crew had simply jumped out and fled, abandoning the top-secret machine. This case highlighted the psychological factor. The massive yet clumsy and unreliable machine inspired fear not only in the enemy, but in its own crews, ready to abandon it at the first serious threat. The combat debut of the King Tiger on the Eastern Front turned into a crushing failure. More of these machines were lost in 2 days than in all previous battles in Normandy. But more importantly, Soviet troops obtained invaluable trophies for study. After Sandomir, the King Tiger ceased to be a mystery. Its strengths and weaknesses were meticulously studied, and effective tactics for fighting it were refined and disseminated across all fronts. From then on, there was no place for this behemoth in a war of maneuver. Its fate in the last months of the Third Reich's agony was predetermined, to become an immobile, yet still dangerous, firing point in static defense. After the crushing lesson at Sandomierz, the fate of the King Tiger was finally sealed. It was no longer seen as a weapon of breakthrough or mobile warfare. Its new and essentially only effective role became that of a stationary, carefully camouflaged, fortified firing position. In this capacity, it was still extremely dangerous. As in East Prussia in April 1945, where the fire from 1 King Tiger and 2 self-propelled guns repelled a Soviet attack, costing them 12 tanks. Immobile, it could inflict terrible losses using its accurate and powerful gun, but this was no longer a tank, it was an armored pillbox. Statistics speak more eloquently than any description. By the end of 1944, German data recorded the loss of 74 King Tigers on all fronts. Of this number, only 17 machines were repaired and returned to service. A monstrously low recovery rate, a direct consequence of its impossible weight and evacuation complexity. A knocked-out giant, as a rule, remained in no man's land or on territory captured by the enemy, becoming a total loss. The remnants of these battalions took part in the last convulsions of the Reich, in the winter offensive in the Ardennes, in a desperate attempt at Lake Balaton in the spring of 1945, and finally in the final battle for Berlin. All available machines, including training and experimental models, were thrown into the city. Here, among the ruins, they fought their last duels. On May 2, 1945, when the war's outcome was absolutely clear, the last King Tiger was knocked out in the Spandau Bridge district. Hitler's unfulfilled hope, his wonder weapon, burned along with the doomed capital and the entire Third Reich. Thus ended the story of one of the most controversial and iconic armored vehicles. It's a story of how a brilliant at first glance engineering idea to create an invincible sniper was buried under the weight of its own miscalculations, under the fundamental error of the gun for the gun's sake, under the unbearable weight, under the bombed-out industry, under the tactical flexibility of an enemy that found the key to the impenetrable armor. the King Tiger remained in history not as the fearsome king of the battlefield, but as a heavy, expensive, and ultimately useless monument to desperate attempts to win a war through technical superiority alone, while reality was crumbling on all sides. Its crew, abandoned in that Polish village, perhaps understood this truth sooner than many others.